Hi, folks. This is Mark Smith with Family Tree Life Coaches. Welcome to my new studio. It's the first time I've used my studio. I'm getting used to it. In all the years that I've made videos, I bet I get through on one take 99% of the time. With my new studio today, my light went out. That's new. And I got too thirsty, so I'm going to take number 3. So, welcome to a new business. Mark Smith, Family Tree Life Coaching. One side of the tree is barren. And that's the side that's been damaged and wounded and traumatized and through the icy winter of the scary world that we live in. The other side is flourishing and in recovery and healthy and blessed and thriving after hopefully some of the things that you learn from our channel. I wait and make videos when I'm inspired, and I've come across, been hit square in the eyes with a paradigm shift that's been super incredibly helpful for me, and I just want to pass it on to you. I want to read a quote, and then I want to invite specifically people who might benefit from this particular video. I was going to share with you, Mr. Polly and I get DoorDash, and from Panda Express we get the teriyaki chicken. I eat 2 helpings of it, he eats 1. A quote from Napoleon Hill: one of the blessings of maturity is that it sometimes brings one greater courage to be truthful, regardless of what those who do not understand may think or say. I'm not suggesting that I'm terribly overly mature, but I hope that the maturity that I have recently gained is going to give me some courage to be truthful, because I was sort of thrashing around in the darkness, missing out on a key point of growth and recovery that I think a lot of people are missing out on. I've been to 20 therapists through the years, and not one of them has ever mentioned this until I went to a recent therapist named Steve Cooper. I'll get to him. So this video for you mature people who, and I'm being serious, who don't have raw little kidness, who don't have raw primitiveness. People like you maybe aren't stuck in your recovery process of PTSD or narcissistic abuse. This is for people who still have too much painful reactivity in their relationships, fighting all the time, hell on earth, you know what I'm talking about? This is for people who feel too often when you get up and go to work that you feel like you're 6 years old. This is for people whose triggers aren't going away. This is for people whose abandonment issues are off the charts, and your spouse is really pissed off that your abandonment issues are off the chart because you're projecting onto them. This is for people who are so wounded that you're just too negative and too afraid, and you're always thinking that the other shoe's going to drop, and the other shoe doesn't always drop. I'm talking to people who fear has taken joy from your life. I want to talk to people whose little kid who has been lurking right underneath the surface is running some addictions. And in my case, my little kid likes to eat food. And then the last thing, people that are too sad when they're alone. Being alone can be the most precious, joyful time that you have in life. But people who are frozen in their little kid are terrified of being alone, and they're really, really sad when they're alone, and they can't create self-sourcing and positive energy when they're alone. I've only located one book on Audible that specifically addresses these issues, and that's a book called Growing Yourself Up by a guy named John Lee. Any family systems person, Jerry Wise being the most preeminent of them all, will speak about individuation. Individuation is being a grown-up. When you're individuated, you're mature. We all have various levels of individuation. Even if you know a lot about individual, I remember going and hear a guy named John Kerr, who was like one of Bowen's right-hand guys, and he suggested that he himself might have a limited amount of individuation. So, but if you want to learn about growing your little kid up and becoming a mature person and not having the rawness of your trauma cause you too much instability and craziness and reactivity in your life, then I suggest that you learn more about individuation. I learned on one hand in my years at Family Tree, I had Jerry Wise sitting over here, I had Steve Cooper sitting over here. This guy's a genius, this guy's a genius. And this guy's saying you can individuate and not act like a little kid. That's Jerry's main message, is you can be an adult and operate from your head and not act like a reactive little kid. That's a very loose interpretation. Steve Cooper has taught me that a mature person is somebody who is strong and who isn't childish and who isn't overly needy and who can interact with reactive people and not be pulled in there to their reactivity, and look beyond their sins, look beyond their reactivity, and embrace them as wounded people. And as a mature person has the ability to be around an immature person, the maturity will spill over and impact that other person. You can grow people up without being codependent just by being a mature individual. These were great epiphanies for me. I thought that you got in a relationship, it brought up your inner child, and you did a lot of crying, and that eventually would make you better. And especially these past 5 years, but really the past 15 years, my wounded little kid has been out a lot and has been sort of running my life. Is there anybody else like that? Where you get in a relationship, you get blown up, your little kid comes out, you have all this trauma, it won't go away. Just as you're getting over it, boom, you go through another one. And you do everything that all the people making videos say to do, and the little kid is still right on the surface making you crazy. After 45 years of counterdependency, right underneath the walls of Superman, there's an infant. And then when the universe uses the baseball bat on Superman, uses kryptonite on Superman, then many times you go through a period of time where you're sort of stuck being a little kid. And there needs to be more therapists who come along and say, It's wonderful that you're crying. It's wonderful that you have insight. It's wonderful that you know what a narcissist is and how they operate and how many traits they have. But the real important thing is you need to grow yourself up. You need to be deep, healed, and mature, not just deep and healing. So with my inner child healing, I cried wonderful tears. I've had so many sessions where I've cried and I feel like $1 million afterwards. And it is genuine healing, but then it doesn't translate to maturity and me acting like a grown-up man. My wife, oddly enough, is interested in being married to a grown-up, which hasn't been the case. So I was walking in the light that I had, but even though a tremendous amount of healing from childhood and forgiving people in my adult life has taken place, my inner child, when it was at the helm, was also capable of being too highly reactive in my marriage, of raising my voice and acting like my family. I didn't think it was rage. I was just being a Smith. But the tender little girl in my wife's heart knew it was rage and was afraid of it. I was capable of being defensive, of being overly sensitive to critiquing, which I call shame, of not being able to hear and really see my wife, of having to be right. A man asked me recently, would you rather be right or would you rather be loved? I was capable of interrupting people, especially my wife. I was capable, my little kid was, of making poor decisions, of being too impulsive, of being insanely, goofily jealous. Sometimes when my wife and I would talk and one of our abandonment issues come up, we say, hey, you're being goofy. I was jealous of overly obsessing about my wife, having too much anxiety, of having continuing panic attacks, of my little kid likes ice cream and steaks, and sometimes he's in charge of the diet. My little kid is financially irresponsible. My little kid is way too fragile. He wakes up in the morning and he's scared. And it's hard for him to put his adult clothes on sometimes. My little kid sometimes doesn't like himself enough and fears the universe, doesn't feel safe. Ironically, Mr. There are no victims in the world. If you're stuck in your wounded little kid and you're too fearful and you're projecting jealousy onto people, you're in victim mentality, ironically. People who are in their little kid are looking for rescuers wherever they can find them. My little kid was capable of making financial disasters. 2015, I couldn't work for 2 months because I was in my little kid, and I spent about $60,000 on treatment that I didn't really have. I didn't really care because my little kid needed to be in a treatment center. My little kid would triangle to people, be emotionally cut off, be oblivious, and just not be any fun. So let me give you a few examples of what I mean by not being big when you need to be big. Okay? Being frozen in your little child. Once, early on in my recovery process after shattering, a policeman came and I was driving too fast to make it to my therapy session from one town in Michigan to another, and he pulled me over, and I told him that I started crying because I was in my little kid, and I told him I was going because I had PTSD. And he goes, who has PTSD? I do. And I started crying. And he was so nice. And he scurried around. He goes, I have to give you a ticket, just a little ticket for pulling you over. But just be careful. Grown men don't weep when they're pulled over for tickets. Many times when I'm in my little kid, I wake up in the middle of the night and things are scary at 3 a.m. You know what I mean? I would, right after going to Untitled a lot, they gave us these little stuffed animals. And until recently, I've been snuggling up to a little tiger. And there's nothing wrong with that early on in your recovery. But 5 years later, I'm wanting to be a grown-up man. And I put my little tiger in the closet. One day I had to deal with the BMV in South Carolina, or maybe it's called the DMV, and it's a room full of long lines, sweaty people, bureaucrats, and frustration. And I went in there as a 4-year-old, and I waited and waited and waited in line, and then I didn't have a document that I needed, and I had to drive all the way home and come back and wait and wait and wait in line, and it was traumatizing. Adult people can go to the DMV and take care of their business. I'm prone to earaches. I'm getting over a couple of them as we speak. And for years in my marriage, I would be the little boy and Renda would be the rescuer. And she would take me by the hand and she'd take me to the doctor, and they'd clear the wax out of my ear and give me some antibiotics, and she'd take me to the drugstore, and all the while she was losing respect for me as a man because I wasn't a man. I was a broken little boy. When you're in your little kid, you're whiny. When you're in your little kid, if you're like me, you're sick a lot, because the counter-dependent side, where there's still vestiges of, can drive you too much, and then you crash and burn, and then you stay in your whining little kid. In my wounded little kid, I couldn't shoot a basketball because my hands were shaking. And again, early on, after shattering, I get it, but this was 3 years later, where I just continued the cycle of allowing myself to be traumatized and not growing into some confidence. I'm a pretty good basketball player when I have confidence, but when I'm 6 and my hands are shaking, I throw air ball after air ball after air ball. But when I'm confident against lesser competition, sometimes I'm the man. It's all about confidence, and if you're a wounded little kid, you don't got none of that. One of the striking things about when you're a little kid, at least in my case, is my voice would change. If you'll watch on some of the old videos, there's this guileless, sweet voice, and it sounds like another person. It's a sort of a dissociated part. It's my little boy, and it would sound the same every time. And it's sweet, and like I said, I don't know how many people watched the videos because they were learning a lot, or how many of them just wanted to adopt a wounded little boy who was sort of adorable in his fragileness and in his innocence and sweetness. But you have to grow up. You can't stay there. You can't stay there too long. I stayed there too long, and I got to tell you, let me tell. A lot of you are fans of Mark and Renda, and you notice that we haven't been on the show together very much, and that we ask for your prayers. Renda and I are doing well, but what happened was, in the beginning, I was shattered, and she was a rescuer, and she was the most lovely rescuer that I had ever met, and she came along like an angel from heaven, and it was a mommy taking care of a little boy, and she saved my life. But after a couple years, she was like, "Where's mine?" As a codependent who had played out her rescuing, and I was still, "Take me to the doctor, mommy." I don't want to go out tonight. I don't feel good. So what happened was, as a codependent, some resentment built up, and she began a process of individuation, growing in her own individuality, and not being so turned on by a whiny little snot kid who didn't want to grow up. And in the meantime, we were two little kids who couldn't hear each other, and we were both being reactive. She was projecting onto me, I was projecting onto her, and there was a power struggle. And neither of us could really diffuse the other person because we were too into our wounded little kid. And it's been wonderful for both of us, and both of us have healed a lot. And the cool thing is, now we're able to hear each other. We're rarely little kids with each other anymore. She's starting to feel safe. We are reconciling. It's beautiful. We're both really excited. We're not there yet. We still have a ways to go. But it's so cool to not have to be right, to not have to react to things, to present things as a way of, "Hey, this is my issue, but this is coming up for me." When I present it that way to my wife, she's able to hear it. So we're both going through this process of growing up our little kids, and we're communicating better than we ever have before, because one adult is talking to another adult, and if one little kid happens to show up, the other adult diffuses the communication of that little kid and gets them back into the adult. It's a wonderful thing. I read a description by a woman who writes a blog. Her name's Millie Stukinski. She lives in Harrisonburg, Pennsylvania. It's basically a blog for women about men. And the question is, how can you tell if a man is mature? And this is what she said. Here's the first thing. Is he planning for the future, or is he living day one life at a time? Is he willing to cut out on entertainment and nights out in order to build up a savings account and some investments? Money is a fact of life, and so is discipline. She asked, is he in control of his temper? She said, has he learned how to do his own laundry, cook and clean? If he's waiting for mommy to come and take care of him, run. And on some levels, mommy got tired of taking care of little Mark, and she ran. She didn't run too far, thank God, but good for her. Is he trustworthy? If he is too clingy, that's a bad sign. Like calling you 3 times a day or texting you endlessly, even when you say you're super tired and you really have to go to bed. If there's that much jealousy, you probably should toss him. Sometimes it just depends on the person's recovery process. If somebody's stuck being that infantile in jealousy, you'd have to toss him. But if they're working on it and making progress and learning how to grow up and be mature, then don't toss them yet, but just don't commit fully to them quite yet either. I looked up a website called A Conscious Rethink, and this is how they described a mature person. There's got to be a lot of self-awareness. And if you'd have asked me, I'd have told you I was one of the most self-aware people you knew. I knew myself from a lot of different angles. I knew who my parents were, my grandparents, my children. But you know what I didn't know? I didn't know how to not act like a little kid. The little kid would wake me up in the morning, would keep me awake at night, and would make me fussy, grouchy in the middle of conversations with my wife. So I would hear this feedback, usually in a reactive way. And when you hear reactive feedback, you may not always be open to it, but it's been refreshing and life-changing to have self-awareness about being immature, being frozen as an infant or a little kid, and then talking to that little kid and say, dude, we're going to man up. We're not going to stay and be a little kid. Self-control. When you're an adult and you're having a conversation and things get heated, things don't have to boil over, and it doesn't have to become, a shit show. So many of my couples that come in, and half of the service that I offer them is I don't let them interrupt each other, which makes the room safe. But that isn't what happens at home. Accountability. Little kids find ways to not be very accountable. Humility. Self-acceptance is so important. So often when somebody's stuck in their wounded little kid, the problem is they don't love themselves. And the biggest order of business is you really have to learn how to love yourself. There's some things recently that came up for me that caused a lot of guilt from early in my childhood when my infant sister died when I was taking care of her when I was 10. I carried around a lot of self-hatred because I blamed myself for that. And it's so vital, if you're going to be a self-sustaining, happy adult, you have to love yourself. You have to source yourself. There has to be self-acceptance. The next one, gratitude. Have an attitude of gratitude. That's why people that work 12-step programs generally have really solid recovery. Why? Because they practice gratitude, among other things. But if you're constantly being re-traumatized, woken up in the middle of the night, have terrible needy jealousy, you're waiting for the other shoe to drop, you're not going to be grateful for nothing. You're going to be whiny and Mr. Fussy Britches, is what my wife calls me. The seventh part of being mature is having compassion. not just for others, but also for yourself. Being able to give to others, being open-minded, having a sense of wonder about the universe and curiosity, having a sense of optimism that, of course, is tinged with realism. We call that in our practice plus. A plus for how you see yourself, you love yourself, and a plus for the universe. Who knew 6 months ago that COVID-19 could do this to the world? But a healthy person has optimism that's tinged with realism. There's a whole lot of real going on between, the police brutality and the racism that's ripping apart our nation, and the COVID pandemic that's, sweeping the world and crippling the world. But a mature person still has some optimism. They're flexible. They're not control freaks. They are highly resilient. Little kids who are frozen in time are resilient to a point, but they don't reach maturity. They don't reach a place where they can be joyful just in their own presence. They have to suck from the teat of another's joy. They have to draw energy and self-esteem too much from other people. Another quality of maturity is patience. And I'm grateful that my wife has been patient with this wounded little kid and has stuck around until I've started to grow up and be the kind of man that she wanted me to be. Somebody who is a grown-up, is honest. And a little kid will, they're going to lie every time. I didn't steal the cookie, Mommy, even though you got cookie crumbs on your chin. I looked up another website, and there was a couple other attributes of maturity, and that is strength. That this comes from the power of positivity. Mature people have strength, and they have a desire to continue to learn and grow. They know a lot. They're very resourceful. They're very strong. Their little kid isn't running the show, although they can tap into their little kid at the right time. That's a deep person who recovery is doing them a lot of good. I got to be honest with you. My extended family probably looks at me a little bit like a kook. They know I help a lot of people. They know I've been very successful, but they've seen the wounded little kid up close too much, and they're still waiting for him to grow up. And one of my joys in the next 10 years is to really mature into a 61-year-old man I'll be on Wednesday this week, instead of a 7-year-old or a 6-week-old. So I'm just grateful for Steve Cooper's wisdom, who has woken me up to the wonders and the joys of being an adult, of being able to listen, to not have to be right, to keep the focus on the family of origin stuff and quit holding your spouse so responsible for every mood that comes over you. Nobody can make you feel anything, okay? So in my work, these are things that I'm doing to stay in my adult self and that is to not be too needy in my relationship, to give the woman some space. Her sister's visiting this week, and I'm not going to get to interact with her much, and that's okay because I'm a grown-up. What I've learned to do is really listen to my wife and focus on meeting her needs. I've learned if you meet the needs of the person you love, they're going to do a whole lot better at loving you back. I'm learning to self-source, to hang out with Mr. Pauly and hang out at the condo and listen to God and do a little exercise and hang out with a little family and do the things that are in my heart to do, to balance out between my kid part and my adult part. That's part of self-care. And a person who cares enough and who is an adult and who is mature and can do his adulting or her adulting, they're blessed and they're happy. So that's the next thing, is I'm learning how to take really good care of myself for a change and not get run down and sick. I'm starting Wednesday with an exercise program, and I'm gonna wrestle my diet away from the little kid and put it back in charge of the grown-up man. If the little kid is too much in charge of your eating, you'll die early. I ain't gonna die early. I've got to work my way out of some debt that the little kid has arranged for myself. I'm excited about mentoring some new therapists at Family Tree, of building this new business that I'm going to be building with the help of some great marketers, and also reconnecting with my family of origin. Those are things that I do to work on being an adult. You know, being alone, finding joy, sourcing for myself. John Kennedy said, "Don't ask what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country." That works with wives. When you're stuck in your little kid, you're always asking, "What can you do for me?" You're always asking your friends, "What can you do for me?" And what I'm learning is, what an adult does is gives to others. What a unique thought. So I hope that this has spoken to you. I know that I'm not the only man-child out there. I know that there are women-childs out there too, who, God bless our hearts, we're doing everything we can. We cry our guts out. We go to therapy all the time. We always try to do the right thing, but we keep finding ways to reenact the trauma. And we keep finding ways to injure ourselves. And we stay stuck on our little kid and we do dumb shit. And the good news is, I'm on a journey of growing up, and I've made remarkable progress, if you ask my wife, in terms of our marriage, being able to be in my adult self. But I'm looking forward to having it impact my work, my practice, my relationship with my kids, my relationship with my health. There's a time and a place to cry. There's a time and a place to regress. It's a blessing and a strength to be able to let the tears of that little kid flow. But just don't set up camp there, folks. If you set up camp where your wounded little kid is, you're going to be depressed, you're going to be afraid, and you're going to be alone. And that isn't what inner child healing is about. Inner child healing is putting the past in the past and empowering you to move forward to be blessed like you've never been blessed before. And I'm so excited about the rebuilding that's going on in my marriage when it's two adults who know how to self-source, who are sort of meeting each other again for the first time and make a connection that is mature and healthy. And very grateful for that. Thank you guys for watching today. I'm going to be making more videos on this topic of maturity. I'll probably make some videos on individuation and maturity. Same thing. It's a blessing to grow up. And as you've taken this in, I hope that those who fit in the category of the man-child and the woman-child, that you'll follow me as we can develop and mature together. Thank you for watching today, and God bless.